Richard, it's a pleasure to be with you today. You've been writing steadily for both the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune and the National Interest. You're a former State Department expert on Central and South America, and I know you're in Chile right now. So I thought it was an opportune moment to ask you, what is your assessment of the events in Venezuela?
Well, it's quite remarkable when one wakes up in the morning and finds that Nicolás Maduro, who'd been in power for so long, has suddenly been given a one-way ticket to the United States. But of course, that leaves us with all sorts of questions. Nobody should shed too many tears over Maduro himself. He and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, ran Venezuela into the ground basically over almost 30 years, which was once one of the most prosperous countries in Latin America, is now really in ruins. So we have to see what happens next.
How much credit do you give to President Trump for invading and toppling and apprehending Nicolas Maduro? Is it a good thing?
We'll find out, I guess. Certainly, the one thing you can say is it at least opens a door. There may be some hope for a change in Venezuela after such a long stretch of being under a dictatorship, under a situation of prolonged economic collapse. Venezuelans are desperate for change. The question now is, are they going to get it? President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio have outlined this three-stage plan for Venezuela. Implementing it will be no small task, and we're only at the very beginning of what could be a very long-term process.
What is the three-stage plan?
First stage was stabilization. Second stage was economic recovery. The third stage, transition to democracy. Now, the first stage, stabilization, in a sense, they've got that. The one thing they did not want to do was to land an army into Venezuela to take over the country by force, the sort of things that occurred in Panama or Grenada, not to mention Iraq and Afghanistan. So instead, having removed Maduro, they are now dealing with the people that are left over from the Maduro regime, including specifically Delcy Rodriguez, who was the executive vice president and under the regime's constitution, is at least for the time being the new head of government in Venezuela. Of course, the price of that has been they're not really dealing with the representatives of the Venezuelan people, who, after all, did have an election last year, and now they're out in the cold, at least for the time being, while the Trump administration works its deals with the incumbents. The next stage is economic recovery, which has been entirely phrased in terms of petroleum, bringing American firms down to Venezuela to open up its petroleum sector, make it recover, and provide a lifeline for the people. The plan apparently is that taking advantage of this fleet that we've assembled in the Caribbean, will be obligated to send all its oil to the United States. We will sell it and then send the money back one way or another to Venezuela to be used presumably as we see fit. Then the third stage is transition to democracy. And it's no timeline has been established for that. I just have been reading that Trump will be meeting with Maria Corina Machado, who is the driving force behind the efforts to bring democracy back to Venezuela. But how long they'll be dealing with the remnants of the Chavista regime is a big unknown.
How is it that Venezuela went so off the rails? You mentioned earlier that it was one of the, if not the, most prosperous countries in South America. What happened? Why was it derailed?
Well, there was a famous Venezuelan economist and really one of the founders of OPEC, who described oil as quote, the devil's excrement, unquote. It seems that it gives you great wealth and prosperity, but not used right, it can drive a country into the ground. Venezuela achieved great income from petroleum, and it spent it, and it spent its income and more, and therefore, over time, the country had become a pure petrostate, living and dying by the price of oil. And then, of course, oil goes up, but it also goes down. Oil went down, and in 1999, the Venezuelans, who were very unhappy and suffering, decided that Hugo Chavez would be their savior. It was an error of historic proportions. Chavez had tremendous good luck because right as soon as he got into office, oil prices began to go back up again. He used that to buy popularity, both with the public, with the military forces, and then over time, essentially screw the country down into a one-party state.
One of the countries that invested substantially in the Chavez Maduro regimes was none other than China. How do you think they're dealing with the fallout from what's occurred?
Well, one thing you do need to remember is Venezuelan oil is not all that crucial to China. I think something like 4% of China's oil comes from Venezuela. So China will do fine with or without Venezuela. They're probably not too happy about all the money that's owed to them and how that will be collected. I believe there is some Chinese investment in the oil sector, and what their future will be. I'm sure the Chinese are viewing this, from a global perspective. What does this mean in terms of how the United States views foreign affairs, and what this means, as of our switching really from a global interests to concentrating on the Western Hemisphere. All that will need to play out over time.
What about Russia, which also was a close ally of Chavez and Maduro?
Well, clearly they backed the wrong horse, and it's very embarrassing that Russia is unable to maintain this important foothold in the Western Hemisphere. Globally, it's not been a great time for Russia. They're no longer in Syria. I believe we can only guess as to what's going to happen in Iran. So yeah, it's not been great for Russia. The one consolation they can take from it is kind of a moral one, in which they can say, well, if President Trump can do this to Venezuela, why can't I do whatever I want with Ukraine?
Is President Trump resurrecting America's claim to be a global superpower that really has no rivals?
Well, Trump has spoken pretty much saying he's guided entirely by his own personal sense of morality. You probably have looked at the national security strategy, which was released some weeks ago, in which it's very much on this sort of America first. America takes care of its interests, pretty narrowly defined, and the Western Hemisphere in particular is an area in which you know we don't want to see penetration at all by foreign rivals.
Is Trump's strategy actually working? You have the president of Colombia now hurrying to visit with Trump, a staunch leftist, and now appears eager, if not desperate, to curry favor with his northern neighbor.
Whenever you have a military operation aimed at regime change, there are a lot of ripples going outwards. I know we saw that after Iraq, et cetera. And for a while, people really take notice and are very concerned. Certainly, the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who's no particular fan of Trump and vice versa, has probably gotten a bit nervous as a result. Personally, I think the idea of taking over Colombia or somehow repeating what we've done in Venezuela is a low priority. I might add that Petro is 6 months away from an election, so he won't necessarily be around for a while. But clearly, he felt the need to go to Washington and forestall what at least in his mind is a genuine concern that something might happen.
What about the island nation that both President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have singled out over the past week as being in imminent danger of collapsing, namely Cuba?
Well, we've been hearing about Cuba's imminent collapse for a very long time. An end to the communist regime established so long ago, 1959, by Castro, would be a welcome development and would give the Cuban people a chance they haven't had for 2 generations now. But it's by no means guaranteed this is all going to happen. What is true is that Venezuela has been a supplier of oil at concessional prices to Cuba. Not the only one. Mexico actually has provided oil at considerably more than Venezuela. But even what Mexico and Venezuela together are providing, and I think for a while Russia too, Venezuela has a huge energy crisis, which is only going to get worse if Venezuela is no longer one of their suppliers. Will this bring them over the brink? It's hard to say. These autocratic regimes, they understand what they need to do to stay in power, which is basically find enough money to pay for the armed forces and the police, and engage in repression. Would this be the turning point? One can certainly hope so, but no guarantees. Mhm.
Final question. Has the Senate is passing a war powers resolution? You had 5 Republican senators defect, and there is concern that the United States is embarking upon an open-ended commitment in Venezuela. Do you share those concerns, or do you think that everything is going to be hunky-dory over the next few months?
Well, one likes to hope that things will go well. The various elements of this three-stage plan, they could all work out, or they could start to go south on us. When you speak of dealing with this repressive government, they're going to have one goal. Their goal is to stay in office.
Are they
To stay in-
wily enough to remain in office and essentially outwit the Trump administration? Trump is threatening them with collapse. However, can we really afford to create the collapse of the regime? Wouldn't that trigger refugee flows into the United States and create a mess that we would feel obligated to clean up?
Well, first we have to decide what we want. What Trump has really kind of cast this entirely in terms of oil, the need for Venezuelan oil, the need for, the opportunity for American companies. And I suspect the regime is prepared to do, whatever he wants with regard to the oil sector, as long as he doesn't press them too hard to head for the exit. I might add that there is no desperate need for Venezuelan oil in the world right now. The world is awash with oil currently. They may Trump may feel, I've created an opportunity for American oil. The government is dancing to my tune. That's all I want. The question is, will the transition to democracy be forced upon them? Are we prepared to play hardball and say, well, the oil that we're forcing you to send to the United States, the money from that will only come to you if you really embark on a serious transition to democracy. And I just don't know whether that is exactly what Trump wants. He doesn't talk much about democracy. He talks a great deal about oil and control.
Well, Richard, I guess we'll have to return in a couple weeks and re-examine where we are on Venezuela. Thank you very much.